When I first talked about this movie, I had said that while none of the Jurassic Park sequels were ever really terrible, I didn't think Jurassic Park needed a sequel to begin with. Its screenplay was so complete, and its story was so utterly finished, that to try to continue with it seemed to only take something away from the experience of the original. Well, after I made that statement, I sat down and asked myself if a sequel has ever been necessary for a standalone film. You could make a sequel to Star Wars or The Matrix because the door was left open for them, and there was room for their ideas to grow. But even then, they weren't necessarily made out of necessity, were they? They were made to continue to tell those stories. And recently, I have completely reevaluated what metric I judge a sequel by, because as a sequel, I thought Jurassic World was pretty good. Unfortunately, it's also in the terrible position of very necessarily having to be compared to the original, and nothing can really measure up to an original that was already damn near perfect. The Dark Knight was able to be an outstanding, nearly flawless masterpiece because Batman Begins was just good. But when what eventually becomes your franchise starts with an outstanding, nearly flawless masterpiece, you very naturally have nowhere to go but down. So the question that I've been racking my brain to answer is, can something be a not-so-good film, but still a good sequel at the same time? I'm not sure I've answered that in my own mind yet, but I'll say this. If a film can, Jurassic World certainly is. It's certainly the best Jurassic Park sequel that's ever been made, for whatever that's worth. The film starts out with the park working just fine, and in fact it has been working fine for years. Very little is done to explain how this place even exists after all the mayhem of just the first movie, let alone if you count the three, but I was actually kinda happy with that. Any answer they give would likely have been unsatisfying, and I was happy to just let it go. Still, many references are made to the first film. In fact, I would say that this is much more a sequel to the first one than it is to any of the last two films at all. Needless to say, the park doesn't run on Unix anymore, and what was once a small control room in the first film has now turned into something akin to NASA. All of the rides and attractions are overseen very well, and everything in the park goes off completely without a hitch. I have to say, as a lover and admirer of the first film, I actually did get a big smile on my face from seeing this park actually working, and actually making people happy. In fact, the park works so well and has been in operation for so long that some of the patrons even seemed a bit bored. This was in fact the catalyst for the corporate bigwigs to go ahead and design a massive super dinosaur to attract more patrons. This is where Jurassic World does its moral dilemma and lesson thingy, and kudos to them. They actually did do that this time in a more effective way than the last real sequel did, but I'm actually not sure that this film has all that different a message from the first one. It's really just kind of more of that lesson, just done in a way that's a bit more obvious. Jurassic Park's power when it came to its moral dilemma was in the conversations between the characters, with the scientists being the most against monkeying with nature and those who stood to gain from it being in favor of it. But there are no real conversations in this, and very few debates, save for things having to do with the potential military applications of the dinosaurs. For the most part, they just say what the dilemma is, and then they show things going wrong. What I found made this idea work is that manufacturing the dinosaur was actually unnecessary. Had the park been doing poorly in sales, I think that would have been too on the nose. But as we are told in the film, the park is doing just fine financially. Their sales are doing well and rarely dipped. They only really thought they needed a new and exciting attraction to keep sales up thanks to the focus testing to a fault and over-reliance of incessant bean counting. To me, this was an issue more about what happens when you over-rely on focus groups and use raw data rather than more down-to-earth, real-world conclusions, and I thought that made it more interesting. Also, for whatever it's worth, I liked the dinosaur they made. I liked it because, frankly, it wasn't all that impressive. I was actually expecting something stupid and over-designed with several dinosaur parts that don't go together or something like that, but the thing was basically just a big T-Rex. I started to wonder if that was the point, how they went into all this trouble and risk to create something that wasn't all that worth it in the first place. I thought they were going to keep the super dinosaur hidden through most of the film and then have a big jack-in-the-box reveal at the end, but this also surprised me because we see it pretty unceremoniously pretty early in the film. Anyway, two main storylines pretty much happen at once. Two children are sent to the park as well as to visit their aunt, who is the park's operations manager, but who doesn't seem to have a whole lot of time for them. They end up getting lost just as a mega dinosaur is terrassing through the park, and the park officials have to try to stop it. Adjacent to that story, for the most part, is Owen Grady, a velociraptor trainer and an expert on the species. And you know, when I saw his part in the trailers as he behaved like the velociraptor whisperer, I gotta tell you, I thought this was gonna be stupid. And it really wasn't. Owen's character is a trainer who isn't fearless in the face of the dangerous animals. He doesn't claim to be able to control or predict them. He can master them to a point because he has the utmost respect for them, and more guides them rather than commanding them. This respect for the dinosaurs as animals and predators is the thing that impressed me the most. Watching someone train dinosaurs as though they were horses is potentially silly. You really have to get that role just right in order for this to pay off the right way. And once again, we see what a genuinely good actor Chris Pratt is, as he absolutely nails it. I think his might be my favorite Jurassic Park character so far, in fact. The rest of the cast is less impressive. There's a new character who essentially took over for Hammond after his passing, and tries to remain true to the spirit of what he created. Unfortunately, he isn't developed enough and really gets lost in the shuffle after a time. The kids are nothing to speak of, not that the kids in the first one really were either, but they at least had the dynamic of another character to play off of. It's just these two most of the time, and their part in the story leaves a bit to be desired. I loved the two in the control room, as they seemed to be a mirror for the Jurassic Park fans in the audience, and they lent themselves well to a few comical moments. Overall, the characters are fine, albeit a bit banal. But then they went and did something rather odd. The only holdover character from the first Jurassic Park is B.D. Wong as Dr. Wu, who was an extremely minor character in the first film, but here they tried to fashion him into almost a villain, sort of. I mean, it was kind of interesting, sure, I'm just not sure what the point was. And they gave him a black turtleneck and everything. I don't know, it was just weird for me. As for the story, I mean, it's a Jurassic Park film, so you can probably guess where it goes. Though I have to say, it surprised me somewhat there as well. I was expecting a similar scenario to Jurassic Park, in which the park gets shut down and all the animals escape, but that actually doesn't happen. Only 2 of the park's animals ever really end up escaping, and most of the time, the park's patrons don't even realize there's anything wrong. We punt back and forth between the super dinosaur being about 4 miles away from Jurassic World and getting closer and closer, and the park being in perfect working operation. This actually did take me back to the spirit of Jurassic Park, where they just let the atmosphere breathe a bit before plunging us into action. Still, a lot of the time it seemed like they were doing more trying to capture the atmosphere of the first film than actually succeeding on their own. This film was clearly made by people who loved the first film, and it showed. Oh, it showed. I don't think there was one scene in the film that didn't have some kind of a Jurassic Park reference in it, be it a line, or a shot, or a plot point, or a frame, or the blocking. There were just a lot of homages in this film, to the point where it almost would have been fair to call this Jurassic Park World. There were so many homages, in fact, that it started to become like one of those old Pepperidge Farms commercials. Do you remember the scene where Lex and Tim were trapped under the glass? Jurassic World remembers. Do you remember when the Gallimimus were running through the plane? Jurassic World remembers. As for the effects, you can put me in the large camp of people who thought it all looked very phony. In fact, I didn't see a single effect in this film that was anywhere near as convincing as the effects in even the first one. It's somewhere above Jurassic Park 3 and below Jurassic Park 1. I'd say serviceable, but the phony-looking effects actually did take some of the dinosaurs' menace away, so I would definitely mark it down as a problem. Another problem I had with the film confirms a trend that I've been seeing lately, and just let me say, when it comes to summer films, I haven't been happy with endings of late. Once again, in case you didn't see it in the title, this is a major spoiler warning, but how is releasing a T-Rex into the equation going to help matters? At least the velociraptors that were fighting the thing were somewhat trained. Say it does somehow manage to kill the thing, aren't they going to have a T-Rex to worry about now? I mean, isn't this essentially having the exact same problem and being in the exact same position as they were before? And it also does kind of take away from the film thematically as well. Had Owen's raptors defeated the thing, it would have had a strong tie to the issue of who they trusted and why. But you just know someone somewhere said, wait, we haven't really shown the T-Rex in this film? Well, we have to do that. Let's let that be the end game. The problem is that the T-Rex didn't have anything to do with the rest of this movie. It was just put in there to please fans, but not in the homage-y, sentimental way that everything else in the film was. It was in such a pandering and unnecessary way. And then someone said, wait, I've got an even better idea. Let's have the T-Rex and Raptor fight it, and for a grand finale, we'll have the big water dinosaur take it out. Wait, what's that you say? The dinosaur is confined to water, so how would that happen? It conveniently gets backed into an area near the water, and at that point somebody should have said, okay, you know what, we're way too overthinking and over-designing this sequence. This is all turning out a bit silly. Yes, the scene was entertaining, and yes, it was exhilarating, but it took away from the goodwill that they had built up for me until that point. From here, the dinosaurs stopped being animals and started being something to showcase, as if the universe they populated suddenly and very self-consciously knew which dinosaurs were the heroes. They even had this stupid part at the end where the Megasaur was thwarted, and the T-Rex and Velociraptor look at each other like, well, we did something sentimental, so I guess we're friends now. And then they go their own separate ways. Too silly, too unbelievable, didn't go well with the rest of the film. I just didn't care for it. But it's a minor blemish on what was otherwise a thoroughly satisfying sequel, and something that I can easily overlook when I watch it again. So on balance, Jurassic World was good. I would say that like The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and Age of Ultron, it has gained a pretty uniform sense of criticism that, like those other films, I don't necessarily agree with, or they weren't a deal-breaker for me, but I also think they were perfectly fair. This film is very samey when compared to the first one, and has the added disadvantage of being similar but not as good. The characters aren't as good or as realized as the characters in the first one, and things get a bit disjointed at times. But again, I'm starting to think this is the problem with just sequels in general. Jurassic Park was a flawlessly written, flawlessly directed, perfect film, whereas Jurassic World was written fine, directed fine, and was fine. So you do have that problem of not being like it was, but I mean, come on, it's never going to be like it was. I would say it's worth it, though, as far as sequels go. So I say see the film and judge for yourself.